Welcome to the Left Foot Breaking Podcast, presented to you by 2040sports.com. With me, as always, is Webbo.
Hey, Lanch. So good to be back.
Yeah, we are discussing the British Grand Prix. Admittedly, we are a few days behind, but give us a few days to, gather our thoughts about an extremely hectic weekend. And thus far this season, I think not only the most memorable weekend, but also it feels like the weekend that has the most weight to it, if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Huge stuff going on.
Yeah. So we got to see sprint qualifying for the first time of 3 times this season. I just wanted to get your quick, just general thoughts about what you noticed from sprint qualifying, if you liked it, if you didn't like it.
Yeah. I made a reason to tune in. I mean, I usually tune into quali anyway, but I did that the day before. So I guess I made a definite decision to tune in and for an extra time that weekend. I guess that's what they want. I got pretty sick pretty quickly of the commentators not being able to phrase or describe accurately what they were presenting. Yeah. I just kind of thought, just get over it, practice a bit beforehand, and you're okay. Call it a sprint, that's fine. But yeah, all the sort of moaning around that was getting a little bit annoying. And I thought that in theory, the sprint length was good, but in practice didn't work at that track, or those tires, or whatever combination it was. I felt like it dragged. That was a happenstance potentially of what happened very early in the sprint. So I think the jury's out a little bit. I don't have a big problem with it affecting the history of the sport. I do have a problem with them deciding to rename what pole position means. That seems kind of bizarre to me. And in other forms of sport in most sport where they have the sprint, quite often they will do either a half or a full reverse grid for that sprint.
Yeah.
As an entertainment thing, rather than you set all the fastest times, then you enter Parc Fermé, and that really confused me. Why enter Parc Fermé and then have a totally empty practice session on Saturday? That they couldn't change anything about the car. Yeah. I didn't understand.
Yeah, that was one gripe that I did have about the weekend in terms of just the format of it, is that I think if they're going to have quali and sprint quali, in my opinion, it would probably go better if it was on the same day and you have those practice 1, practice 2 on Friday. Maybe I think their thought was maybe to have the teams have less time before qualifying, just in general have less data to go off of, because that tends to make it a little bit more interesting. But at the end of the day, like you said, that second practice session really didn't mean anything. I didn't watch it. Normally, I would want to watch practice 3 because I'm up excited to watch qualifying, but I didn't really feel the need to watch it.
No, absolutely. And if you want to throw any sort of changes into the book, then maybe you have Parc Fermé for sprint, and then you can change your setup, or you can change something ahead of the race for practice. For the last practice session or something. It does seem to me as if some things are backwards. Obviously, they want a reason for people to go to the track on Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and I think that's kind of at the heart of it. But when I attended a Grand Prix for 3 full days, I didn't want to attend any less because there was less going on. I wanted to be there for the whole thing. So.
Yeah, and if their object is to get people to come to the track specifically, I don't think it's a good way to do it.
No.
I think this is probably more of a viewership on TV type of thing, because like you said, I've never been to a race weekend like that before, but if I was, I don't think I would have any less of a fun time going to a race weekend if I was watching practice, because I'm still getting to watch the cars, and that's what you go there to do. So, that's not a problem for me necessarily. We got to see a little bit of action in the sprint quali still. It did drag on towards the end after the first few laps, but the battle between Max and Lewis was very good in that first lap, and kind of a little bit of foreshadowing, because when I was watching the race, the race on Sunday, it felt like a mirror image almost of the battle that happened on Saturday, which was really weird. And then obviously the wreck happened, which we will get to in a little bit. Before we move on from sprint qualifying, I wanted to talk about Fernando Alonso's sprint qualifying.
Sure.
Because we have talked multiple times, I believe, on Fernando Alonso and just how good he is as a driver. But the biggest thing I think that you can talk about with Fernando Alonso is how good he is at starting a race. Yep. And the sprint quali played into that so well. Yep. He got, I think, did he gain 5 or 6 positions just in the first lap alone?
It was significant, and it was a lot more than he usually does. He was able to hold on to those gains because there then wasn't a strategy issue, there then wasn't a change of tyre condition or a particular wear and tear kind of issue that often slows him back. It was good. There was a lot of weaving on the straight, which didn't look great for someone with his experience, and deprived us of actually some battles, I thought, which I was on the edge of my seat, wanting them to be some sort of battle going on. It did belie a little bit. I think it was Ricciardo that was stuck behind him for the majority of the
race. So.
The other drivers I think Lando got by him relatively straightforwardly. So I'm not quite sure what Danny Rick's issue was there, but he definitely seemed to just stop progress when he came up behind Alonso. It was good. It was good. I think Raikkonen gained a few places. I was surprised Stroll didn't, and I felt like, despite all the comments that have come out since from the team debriefs, I felt like it really ruined Russell's attempt for pole. Give him 2 lots of starts and 2 lots of opportunities to lose places. Yeah, just made it worse.
Yeah, it seemed. I was actually just about to mention George Russell, because he had his weekend was very up and down, I'd say, because practice 1, if I remember correctly, he was completely off the pace. There was something going on with his car that he conveyed over the radio, and I really didn't expect him to be able to make the jump that he did in just that single day. Normally you'd see that kind of jump from Friday to Saturday, not in a 2-hour window in between practice 1 and qualifying. Let alone, the fact that it's going from a brand new format of 1 hour of data before before qualifying. And his
quali lap was off the chain. It was the most outstanding single lap I think we've seen all year.
Yeah. I'm a personal believer that I don't think the perfect lap exists, but that was pretty close. It was a great lap, and he did it twice, got 7th in Q2 and then 8th in Q3. And if I remember correctly, he was only like a 10th or 2 off of 4th place. It
was special, and it's definitely one to remember. Unfortunately, it's just not helping him. Helping him get what he wants, which is points and what Williams needs so badly.
And I know that there were rumors that he might have been announced as the new Mercedes driver heading into the weekend, and obviously that would have been nice at his home track for that to happen.
Sure.
Didn't happen. The jury's still out on whether it's going to happen. I think it's probably set in stone at this point. I wish they would announce it already, just so I could know.
Yeah. We've got fresh rumors this week. I'm seeing on not your 100% reliable websites. So fresh rumors, but the only thing that makes me wonder about that is just how easily Valtteri acquiesced quite often through the weekend. And you think, well, I knowing Valtteri as far as we do, I don't think he'd behave quite that way if he'd just been fired effectively. So interesting.
Yeah, it's I mean, it could go up to just the fact that he's Finnish, him and Kimi they have just a different way of going about things than most of the other drivers on the grid. Kimi's a little bit more I would say on the extreme end than Valtteri is. Valtteri is pretty just calm normally, but it's hard to judge that situation. You know, I don't want to go out and say Russell's going to be the Mercedes driver next year. If I did, it would be out of me just wanting it to happen, not necessarily that I think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's move on to the race, because that's where the bulk of the action.
I do just want to say about that sprint, that early lap with the sprint, is that I felt that, as you say, foreshadowing. But there were two occasions, I think the first two occasions of the weekend, where Verstappen defended hard to the inside, ignored the apex, and drove to the outside curb. So Lewis had to back off. I think that's important that we log each of those in turn.
Yeah, because I was just about to bring up that first lap, and
right.
I'm really enjoying the championship battle this season. I know you probably are as well.
For sure. Yeah.
And there's been so many races where they're always at each other. You know.
Yeah.
We saw it in Bahrain. We saw it in Imola. We saw it in I don't think we saw it in Portimao. We saw it in a lot of different places this season. And once again, Verstappen and Hamilton are just duking it out on the track. We get to Cops, and I'm going to say it's probably going to be the most controversial moment of the season at this point.
Sure.
At least up to this point, because there are people who are on the side that say Hamilton did nothing wrong, didn't deserve a penalty, it was Verstappen's fault. And there are people like Helmut Marko who say that Hamilton deserved a race ban, which personally, I think both drivers are at fault. Race ban is definitely not what I think Hamilton deserved. I think there were a lot of people who were saying, Hamilton was trying to kill Max. It wasn't intentional. That notion needs to be put to the side. It was fairly dangerous move. It is Cops, the fastest corner on the circuit, pretty much. So there is that risk of danger. He missed the apex, and it was a bit weird because it looks like I can't tell if he lifted and that's why Max was able to get that sudden burst of acceleration, or if it was just the fact that he was, drifting out wide. I'm not really sure. Either way, Max just got a sudden burst of speed ahead of him and collided tires. And the way his tire came off, before we talked about the actual crash, the way his tire came off was pretty bizarre, because it wasn't the wheel necessarily, it was just the tire.
Was it? Okay. I thought it was wheel with the hub and everything, no?
Nope, it was just the rubber part. That. Yeah, and seeing that bouncing like that, and obviously without the wheel, it's a lot less weight, so it would do a lot less damage to someone. But still, that rubber was moving at probably around 180 miles an hour when it hit the wall. So pretty scary to see that happen, because that could obviously hurt a spectator, or even Max, if it bounces the wrong way.
Yeah.
But
the Halo does protect the drivers a lot more than they used to, and I think it was Henry Surtees, son of John Surtees, who died. That really led to the Halo development, because a loose wheel came straight to the helmet. Absolute freak accident, but one that you definitely want to be wary of. Yes, it was clearly dangerous, and everybody's first thought, every reasonable human being's first thought was, I hope Max is okay, because the way the car disappeared from the camera view, that was frightening. And it was very similar to the way that Perez disappeared in the sprint. And Perez disappeared, and I didn't see an impact, but he just exited camera left, right? So just suddenly quite frightened by that. Thankfully, when you look at replays, Perez saved it just before hitting the barrier. But worrying. And obviously he was very cagey coming out of the car, and they haven't kind of said he's fighting fit. I'm pretty sure he battered and bruised after that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were able to hear the team radio of after that crash. Didn't. I've never heard a driver, or I have heard a driver sound like he's in that much pain, but Max he was completely out of breath, completely just almost confused and dazed. They asked him Max, are you okay? And really all he could have got was he couldn't say anything. And I think they determined it was a 51G impact, which was I believe similar to the Grosjean wreck, just without the fire. So even he's hitting that tire barrier, which is one of the safer barriers that they have.
It's just shaved past the Tech Pro barrier.
Yeah.
would have been so much softer if it had hit that Tech Pro. So I definitely think Silverstone are going to be adjusting how long that Tech Pro is there for, because it spectacularly missed the site of the impact.
And it also was kind of bizarre the way his car didn't slow down through the gravel. It looked like it was almost skipping across it like it was a rock on water, rather than what the gravel's supposed to do, which is you dig into it and it creates a lot of friction that slows you down. So that also played into how dangerous the crash looked. And obviously we saw Max get out and he's presumably fine. Like you said, probably battered and bruised. And I wanted to just get your thoughts on what the implications might be for a crash like this, because Max is always known as an extremely aggressive driver. He picks a move and he's going to make it, whether there's people around him or not. So I'm wondering if there's going to be some kind of a mindset change from this, possibly.
I think it's 50-50 for me. I think it should change his mind. I think it should give him pause to consider that that always handing the impetus on your opponent to control whether you have a crash or not may not be the right choice. I hope for his sake that happens. I hope for the sake of the championship that happens, frankly. But he's incredibly bullheaded. He's probably the most stubborn character we've ever seen. Certainly in our generation of watching F1. I'm being generous to myself, associating you with my generation, I realise. But yeah, it's certainly in living memory, he's perhaps one of the least mindset developing kind of drivers, right? That's in my view. I may be doing him a disservice, but yeah, from his game face that he puts on, that's how it seems. Now he may be very different under the skin, but or away from the cameras, I guess. So, but yes, you would hope that is a watermark in his career. But I think there's every chance that it isn't. I think the team behind closed doors might say, you know what, two of the drivers did get passed by that same driver in that same corner later in the race, and they didn't have an accident.
Yeah.
And on one of those occasions, he was further back. For me, the worry is that I don't think I've ever seen Max Verstappen lose the battle to win the war. And repeatedly over the weekend, Lewis demonstrated that. So, like I say, twice in the sprint, 3 times on that opening lap. First corner, Verstappen alongside goes off track to defend and retains his position. Third corner, misses the apex, drives Lewis off, but Lewis backs off so he can do a cutback. Fourth corner, same. They approach Copse and it's a different story. It's a repeat of what happened in the previous race, but Lewis goes the other way. Max failed to cover the inside sufficiently, but did end up pushing Lewis right into all that dirt. And you saw the cloud of dirt as he goes over the offline. That, for me, is why Lewis missed the apex and why he slowed suddenly, because he suddenly had no grip. Due to dirty tyres, compromised line. It was all calculated by Verstappen. Verstappen could have pulled across for the optimum line through the corner, but he didn't. He held Lewis to the inside to slow him on the apex. But like I say, 5 prior times that very race, and at least 4 times this season, Lewis has given up the battle for the sake of the championship war. And Max just appears not to be able to make that calculation. I think the accident itself, yes, probably 65-35 Lewis's fault, but over the weekend, I would actually say Verstappen is more at fault for the weekend's behaviour and the way things ramped up. Verstappen had, 50 something laps to use his faster car, use his faster pit stop strategy, teammates. Use all the tools in front of him. He had 52 further laps, or however many laps it was, to defend that. But I have yet to see him happily or even unhappily cede a position, especially on the inside. So that's how I see it. What about you? How do you analyze it?
When I was first watching it, what I should say is that, I live in America, so generally I wake up late compared to when these races are happening. This race, I think, was at 9 a.m. for me. I think I woke up at about 10:30 because I had been working the night before. So when I woke up, I knew the race was happening. So what I do, I used to have notifications from ESPN tell me about F1, but because of the fact that I live in America and I wake up sometimes after stuff has happened, I would wake up and look at my phone and see Verstappen won the race before I'd even watched the race yet.
Yeah.
So I got rid of those notifications, but I made the mistake of going on Instagram right before I started watching the race. And the first post that I saw was drama on lap 1. I didn't see the video. I just saw the picture of Verstappen about to overtake Hamilton. I was like, okay, I know something's going to happen. I didn't expect it to be that. When I first saw it, my immediate thought was that seemed like Lewis's fault. Upon watching it many, many more times as I have, it's pretty clear that it's both of their faults. Like you said, it's probably closer to 65-35 Lewis because, like you said, he did miss the apex, not by a considerable margin, but at least by a car's width. He could have probably kept it a little bit more to the inside. Obviously, he would have had to slow down a little bit more, and I think that was what Verstappen thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
And that is why Verstappen took that corner so aggressively on the outside. I'm not sure if Verstappen would have necessarily made the corner, even if this wreck hadn't happened. I'm
certain he was heading beyond the outside curve of car.
So
and see how he gets the car through that corner. Absolutely. And I think, it's important to note here that in previous podcasts, I've said that Max needs to calm down, and he won't be able to stay on track with these first lap actions, and there he was. He did it again. And this time Lewis may have made a conscious decision to say, that's enough. And come what may, I need to draw a line in the sand here. And it was about time, frankly. I really do think so. No one wants to see an accident like that, but it's absolutely mouthwatering for what happens turn 1, turn 2 in the next race.
Yeah, and with you saying that, I should say, I don't think Lewis was necessarily putting his foot down thinking, I'm going to wreck Verstappen.
No.
I don't think that was his goal at all. In fact, I know it wasn't his goal, because no driver's going to do that. I think he was just trying to just hold his position the way that he hadn't throughout the season so far. And Verstappen probably didn't expect it. I almost guarantee he didn't expect it. Either way, it ended with Verstappen in the wall. Luckily, he's okay. Yep. Presumably, we'll be ready for the next race, which is in just about a week's time at Hungary, which we will need to talk about that race because there is a big rule change coming next week. But the biggest, I think, development of this race happened right after that wreck, which was the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc taking the lead and not giving it up for 50 laps.
Yeah.
It was amazing, actually, in my opinion, the way he was able to hold that lead. I so badly wanted him to win the race. I know that it's great that Lewis got his 8th home win, which is a record for F1 drivers for a single circuit to win, and to the fact that that's his home circuit is really cool. But I so badly wanted Leclerc to win that race.
No, absolutely. I've never. I mean, I'm not the biggest Ferrari fan in the world, but I do like Leclerc. I like Sainz, so I'm kind of in uncharted waters when it comes to Ferrari this year. I mean, look to him for Hungary. He was very strong in Monaco. Hungary is about as close to Monaco as you get for the rest of the calendar. Look to him for Monaco. Look for Hungary. I think he's probably nailed on for a good result there. but he drove a phenomenal race, and it was just the tire characteristics that had the advantage back to Lewis. And have to say, the home crowd. I mean, the pressure Lewis puts on himself to perform at home is absolutely astonishing, and he's done some superhuman drives in the past.
Yeah, I gotta think if this race happened at a place like Baku, I don't know if Hamilton is able to make that recovery drive, because I must say it was a great recovery drive from the penalty. He was lucky to not have an issue with the pit stops, which seemed to be somewhat of a story in and of itself during the race, because it wasn't just one team that messed up pit stops. It was like 3 or 4 of them. And I think the commentators were mentioning that it could have possibly had to do with the heat. I'm not a mechanic, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know if that's the case or not. But either way, multiple teams had problems with getting tires off, getting tires on, many long pit stops. Sainz, Leclerc's teammate, had a very long pit stop. I think Perez might have had one as well. The most crucial one, I think, of the race was Lando Norris's, because not only did that make it harder for him to defend from Hamilton, but it also put him behind Bottas. And I think that probably kind of sealed his fate as not being able to get past Bottas at that point. I think he maybe could have held him back, but I don't. So
it probably a human factor issue more than anything for the pit stop, because there was no consistent technical fault going on. I think it was the human factor of the heat. It's a lot of mechanics home race as well. They tend to have higher social engagements, or you've got rotating personnel a little bit at the moment due to COVID isolations. These things will just cause issues for the rest of the season, I'm sure. But I know from personal experience, I was close to sweating sitting still watching the race on it was that hot here, so I'm not surprised that people were slipping up.
It was that is another part to play in this whole weekend, was the heat in Britain. I'm not good with Celsius, so they kept saying the Celsius temperatures over the commentary, and I was like, don't know what that means, but I assume it's hot.
And it's not an easy calculation to do mentally. It's
not. I used to know it in my head. I learned it when I was in chemistry or biology or whatever it was in high school, but it just escaped my mind. So I don't.
I mean, for me here, ambient temperature was around 95 Fahrenheit, and we have crazy humidity as well when it gets warm like that. So if that means anything to you, that was
I mean that's kind of what it's like in Texas around this time. Obviously, when F1 comes to America for most races, it's normally in October, November, and by then in Texas specifically, it has cooled down to the point where it's pretty. It's a good temperature, like 70s, 80s, which is pretty okay for Texas. Right now, I believe it's probably like 98 outside at 10:45 in the morning. So, but yeah, the heat played into it, and tire wear is always going to be an issue at Silverstone.
Yeah,
we saw. I think everyone did a 2-stop. I don't know if there were any 1-stops.
Not that I remember. Not even the show-stopping, tire-saving people, as far as I can recall. Nobody notable anyway. Yeah. And the one thing that they we got out of the sprint qualifying that we wouldn't have necessarily gotten, I don't think, was knowledge of the blistering on the tires. Sure. Because
there were people who were on medium tires in the sprint race that had blisters after 11 laps.
Yeah.
Which was just incredible, and I guarantee just a headache for the teams to have to deal with that.
Those mediums are actually the hards. The vast majority of other circuits around the year, it was the C4, wasn't it?
No, they were using C1, C2, and C3 this weekend.
Right, so the very, very hardest options. So normally those mediums are normally the hards, and yeah, they were just shredding into. But then we see that in Silverstone with Paredes. Thankfully, we didn't have a single blowout, which was always good.
Yeah, that's what we got out of last year. You know, that fantastic last lap with everyone's tires blowing up. No one knows who's going to finish the race. But yeah, so as the race moved on, we saw McLaren as a whole have a pretty strong race. Daniel Ricciardo had, I feel like, I don't want to say bounce back weekend, because he had a pretty good weekend in Austria a couple weeks ago. He finished, I think, 6th, maybe?
I think 6th, yeah, and bettered it time by 1, yeah.
And, you know, he finished 5th right behind Lando, who finished 4th. Just a great finish for McLaren. And it would have been even better had a Ferrari not finished 2nd.
Right.
You know, that's the battle that they're in. And Leclerc, he was almost untouchable this weekend. I would say the second fastest car on track once Verstappen was gone.
Certainly on the mediums. Yeah.
So Esteban Ocon, we should probably mention, he had a little bit better of a weekend. Obviously, still beaten by his teammate Fernando Alonso, but looking at the weekends he's had since he signed that 3-year extension, it's the best weekend he's had since then.
And since the so-called issue that's happened on his side of the garage, whatever that is, made some sort of change, and either psychosomatically or technically it's helped things out somewhat. So another good performance, another disappointing race for Russell, and just trying to think if there are any other sort of standouts. I don't know if you ever saw, I heard mention that Vettel spun again after that early lap.
I didn't see that. We could talk about that spin, because it was, I don't want to say a typical Vettel spin, but it was kind of a typical Vettel spin in the way he was on the inside of Alonso. It was a pretty good battle up until that point, actually. If you go and watch those onboards, they were kind of a ding-dong battle going through left field, and Vettel's on the inside, and he just tried a little bit too hard to get on the throttle and just spun it right into the old pits. He was able to keep the car going, obviously, but ended up finishing, I think, like 19th. So
he was down, and I think the commentary that I was listening to made mention that he'd apparently spun again or had another issue.
I'm seeing that he did DNF on lap 40, so that's probably what that is. You know, and there was always talk with this new format of there was going to be a driver who missed out the most from it. That driver just so happened to be the driver that was the teammate of Max Verstappen, which is very unfortunate because Verstappen didn't finish either. You know, Perez, he was able to somewhat, I wouldn't say salvage necessarily, but he got at least something out of the weekend because he was able to take the fastest lap away from Lewis Hamilton. It's only 1 point.
That was a really interesting detail, wasn't it? Because he gave up a championship point in order to deprive Lewis of a point.
Yeah.
He was running 10th. The team and the driver had a championship point coming, and they decided it was more important to strip one off Lewis than to gain one in those two championships. Very, very strange decision.
You have to wonder if that, I mean, I don't think that was Perez's call. Couldn't have been Perez's call. Right. I wonder how willing he was to do it. You know, if that was Fernando Alonso. Is Fernando Alonso really going to do that? I don't think so.
Yeah.
But
it definitely seemed about the most petty strategic call I can remember.
Yeah.
It really that really was something else for me.
Yeah. I was pretty shocked about it, honestly. I didn't think they would do that.
No.
I wasn't expecting it at all, and I saw Perez in the pits with like 2 laps to go. I was like, that's just a bizarre call to make.
Yeah.
He was able to get it done, and they said over the radio, thank you, Sergio. Like we talked about his spin in sprint qualifying. It looked a lot scarier than it actually was because at least the footage that I was watching, they were trained on the car in front of him, and there was like a half second where the camera had stopped to I guess, change to a new camera, and Perez just comes flying across the screen sideways.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure it was still a brown alert moment for him in the cockpit. Yeah. He certainly avoided the barrier. Thankfully, the barriers are a long way away from the apexes of Magus Beckett at that point in the circuit. So, that obviously helped him, but yeah, scary.
Yeah. So, end of the race, as we were talking about, Leclerc was leading for most of the race. Lewis having to battle back from that 10-second penalty. He got past Bottas pretty easily. It didn't look like Bottas had to give up too much time, but it didn't really matter because Bottas wasn't really battling for position. He wasn't defending for position, so he didn't really lose anything from letting Lewis past.
No, apparently I've seen some comparisons that show that on that occasion, Valtteri lost 0.2 of a second over the lap. And in the Spanish Grand Prix example, where he refused to let Lewis by for a few corners, both of them lost a second and a half in those laps. So it really interesting kind of effect on the net race. Bottas just appeared to be nowhere and with zero fight in him.
Yeah,
for the race. He got off the podium, but more by luck than by judgment.
Yeah, there's got to be something that's said about the fact that he is in a car which his teammate is only 8 points behind in the Drivers' Championship, and he's not able to catch a Ferrari. And I don't want to take away from Leclerc's race because he had the best race of his season, I would say, besides maybe Baku, or not Baku. I can't remember which race it was now, but this was definitely his best race of the season. But it's still a Ferrari compared to a Mercedes. The Mercedes should have the clear advantage there, and Hamilton had a clear advantage.
You saw the pace difference. Yeah, exactly. You saw that pace difference was frightening at times that Lewis was able to generate. I mean, whether he turned the engine up and has cost himself wear later in the championship is a factor, as is the damage to Verstappen's car. Yeah. That's going to be a factor. I'm sure of it. Whether it costs them mid-season development this year, whether it costs them development next year in the budget. But I think I sent you a link about the hidden cost of these accidents, what it's actually doing to the championships, and the fact that Mercedes have really struggled since that crash between Russell and Bottas at Imola. Mm-hmm. To regain their upgrade momentum, simply because they can only claim €100,000 for any accident damage.
Yeah,
so
and
really interesting.
It was really interesting. There weren't very many pictures of Verstappen's crash because for some reason there were just no photographers in the area. So the only pictures we have are of the ones that were either on the broadcast or the ones of people in the stands. But either way, the car was trashed. There's no that car is going to get destroyed from a 51G impact at around 180 miles an hour, maybe faster. I'm not sure.
I mean, you see. I was just trying to remember whose car it was. Remember when Leclerc hit the right side of the car in Monaco out of the swimming pool, and the left side of the car, drive shaft is what failed, and that was a lot softer of an impact than the power unit in the back of Verstappen's car would have suffered. Yeah. Apparently the Honda guy at the track said visually it was quite a relief to see the power unit when it got off the truck, but he said visual inspection is nothing when it comes to checking these power units over. Yeah,
it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It's got to run. No. It's an engine. It has
to go on the dyno. It has to have all kinds of stress tests to make sure it's fit for use and it's got enough life left in it.
Yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised if they had to get rid of all the components to the power unit. For those that don't know, there are 6 components to a power unit. I'm not exactly sure. MGU-H, MGU-K, Energy Store, ICE. There's the turbo. I think there might be one more. Either way, there's multiple components to an engine. They can take these components apart. If one is unnecessarily worn, they can replace it with a new one. there are certain allocations for these parts, and if you run out of those allocations, you take grid penalties. And I think this is where the implication comes in the most for that wreck, because the implications of them almost, I feel, guaranteeing to have to take at least one grid penalty this season from this wreck.
Right.
Maybe more, who knows?
Yeah.
No,
we'll see how it works towards the end of the season. Those allocations will run out, and all the cars are very much on the limit for optimal race running for every allocation for the entire season. So maybe the season gets cut back by 2 races and it works out okay, but you've over-designed and over-engineered some of those components if they last longer than they should.
Yeah.
Because you've potentially lost lap time. So yeah, it's another factor to play in. I do think the damage cost, the cost to rebuild, the cost to rush parts out and replace, those are things that are really important. And they said the only bright side they could see was that it occurred in the UK where the factory is.
Yeah.
And so it's just a lot easier for them to carry out that work and ship it and everything when it's only going a few miles.
Yeah, and we have to mention that Red Bull is known for being one of the better engineering teams. They have by far the best pit crew. They own the record for the fastest pit stop of all time. We go back to Hungary from last year when Max in the rain slipped, his car slipped and hit into that wall, and his engineers were able to make this miraculous recovery just before the race to get his car ready to race. So I don't want to discount what they're doing because they're obviously very good at their job, but at the end of the day, some things are just too difficult, I guess is a good word to say.
It's a constant payoff, and it's never been like this before. It's a constant payoff between where you place the money and the engineers, and it's not as if the components that have been damaged can as easily be rebuilt by the same people who were sitting around waiting. They've all got jobs to do. They've all got tasks that are planned for them, just the same way as anybody on track or track side. It is a big deal this season, and it's the first season of what looked to be a fairly generous budget cap, but actually represented a significant drop for the top 3 teams.
Yeah.
Well, chief among them, they were the ones spending the most.
And I gotta say that I personally think, at least in what the practice has seen, I think the cost cap is working the way it's intended to. It's making the top teams have to focus a little bit more, because just one of these wrecks, the wreck between Bottas and Russell in Imola, obviously affected Mercedes afterwards. We haven't seen how it's going to affect Red Bull, but this crash is similar, if not worse, in terms of damage than the Bottas one. And it, luckily for them, at least, there's a season break coming up after Hungary. So they will have a month to, get that car ready for Spa at the end of August.
They have no more time off that they can do anything practical with than they do between a normal space of 2 weeks between Grand Prix. Because they are mandated to not go to the factory and to tackle work emails during that 3-week break. So they can stagger things and they can rearrange things, but everybody has to have 2 clear weeks off in that period. So it is interesting. I think another factor with Red Bull is my admiration for the team has gone up further when you take into account the people running that team. Helmut Marko and Christian Horner are 2 of my least favorite people sitting around the paddock. And Christian Horner in particular had quite an awful weekend with his reactions. He fancies himself a racer. I know he has raced in the past, but to bandy around the idea that was akin to attempted murder or things like that is is troll baiting. And of course, we've then seen a big thing. I don't know if you're planning to come onto this, but the post-race racism that we've seen and abuse, ironically, for me, is probably going to preclude any post-race appeal being upheld, because I think politically the FIA are now in a situation where they have to be on Lewis's side because of the racial argument. Now, the racial behavior is completely despicable.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite amusing that those idiots who have perpetuated such a vile thing have probably cost Max any chance at appealing the race results.
Yeah. I don't see them changing anything about it, especially this far away from the Grand Prix as we are. There's no place in motorsport for that. I think Lewis has proven that, race doesn't mean anything when it comes to how good you are as a race car driver. So I don't see where those arguments can even stand in the first place.
No.
I wish it didn't happen like that. Obviously, like you said, it's a little bit ironic that people doing that has sort of created this aura around Lewis that makes him a little bit more untouchable in the FIA standards, because now they're having to go against that essentially, and that's politically, I guarantee the FIA does not want to touch that. It's so this has been one of the most ground-shaking weekends we've seen this season in terms of just everything happening. The championship has completely turned on its head, because now, even though Max has an 8-point lead, his momentum has completely stopped from when he was winning 4 races in a row just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and the psychological blow, the physical blow, those are really red letter days, I think, in the fight for the championship. Maybe he'll be fine. Maybe he'll just attack the race as he always has done, and he will refuse to change. The FIA and the stewards literally rewrote the rule book because of the way he used to behave on track. To outlaw the Verstappen move, right? So it's quite interesting that he has caused seismic shifts in the way in which these things are ruled on. It's just mouth-watering, isn't it, to see what's going to happen.
Yeah. I'm excited. We're not even halfway through this season. I think this was the ninth or 10th race of what was originally scheduled to be a 23-race season. Probably going to end up being less. That still, every race now from now until the end of the season could end up getting canceled. No one knows. It's all up in the air. So I think for now, that has created the culture of every race counting just a little bit more, because you don't know what races won't count.
Yeah.
So moving on to Hungary, which is the next race we have in just about a week's time. Pretty different track from Silverstone. Very much more downforce heavy than Silverstone is. Not as high speed, which will, like you said, play into the Ferrari's hands a little bit. We've seen them in their car works a lot better in low speed situations, i.e. Monaco, the second sector in Baku. So I would probably expect to see them in a similar spot to where they were in Silverstone. Maybe Sainz is a little bit higher. I don't want to say race win, because, I could jinx.
Leclerc is my pick. Leclerc is my pick for the race win. And won't that just be awesome for the championship as well, to have another mixed-up situation like that? I think McLaren will go a little bit backwards. I think Alpine, Ferrari will go a little bit forwards. And Leclerc doesn't have far to go forwards in order to win. So he's my pick. It might be an outside bet, but
and we're gonna have to see this is an interesting spot in Max Verstappen's career, because it's the first time in a while. Well, this season was the first time he had ever led the championship, and
Yes.
back when he began to lead the championship, we were wondering how is Max going to be able to handle the pressure. Obviously, he handled it beautifully up to that point. Now we have to see a different side of Verstappen, where he is on his back foot, and he needs to grind a performance out of himself that is improbable, to say the least.
And he needs to see the position when he's defending a championship and it's tight. You know, the further he got away from Lewis, the less likely we were to see any sort of pressure bubble happen. But you know, 5 races on the bounce was unprecedented, and no one was expecting that, and no one wanted to see that either, outside of the Verstappen and Red Bull camp. But it's really interesting now. He's only ahead by a few points, and Lewis is in the hunter role, which, you know, he's shown he can drive in any of those roles over the years. So I don't know. It feels like the balance has shifted towards Lewis, despite the fact that Red Bull is still tremendously quick. It feels like it's possibly one of those moments, like when Mark Webber was closing in on a potential world championship. I think it was 2013, and then he DNF'd in Korea, and it just knocked the wind out of him, metaphorically. And he never really fully recovered from that. Now, I don't think it's that serious for Max, but you never know when it's your only chance to go for a championship. And that's, you know, the history of Formula One is littered with single world champions. And there are far more of those than there are multiple world championships. Everyone thinks that Max has got his whole career ahead of him, but a weekend like this really does prove that a crash can do things to a career, and he may never get in a world championship winning car ever again.
You know, next year we're going to see brand new regulations. So no one really knows what's going to happen next year. It's likely going to be a giant mix-up. Red Bull could fall to the bottom. I don't necessarily expect that to happen, but it's possible. We've seen it happen. You know, Williams just, 7-8 years ago was a midfield team, possibly fighting to be one of the top teams, and look where they are right now. They've,
before then ruled the world through the 90s. The early 90s, it was all Williams. Prior to that, it was all McLaren. So historic performance is absolutely no guarantee of future performance. I'm completely with you. I think it's interesting. A lot of people sort of poo-poo people like Jenson Button, who are a single-time world champion, or Raikkonen, for instance. But in the case of Button, he had 1 year where he had the championship-winning car, and he won the championship in that car. So that's 1 for 1 in my book. Lewis has won 7 out of probably 8, possibly 9 world champion, maybe even 10 possible championship winning cars. It's a very, as I go back, it's mouth-watering, and I can't wait to watch the race. I remember like checking the calendar and just hoping there was a race this weekend, right? I just want to see it back on track. And I can't remember the last time I watched Grand Prix and have so quickly thought, what's going to happen next?
And if things weren't already difficult for Red Bull, there is a rule change coming in this upcoming race that is most definitely not to their benefit, which is that pit stops are being slowed down. I don't have much information on this. I saw a video kind of describing it. Basically, it kind of seems like there's going to be a wait before the mechanics can work on the car. Either that or there's going to be a wait after.
So, as far as I understand it, and I'm a little bit sketchy, the first proposal was a minimum 2-second pit stop time. Just flat out minimum. And there was quite a few protests based on, they said, why are you outlawing speed effectively, right? And it's been massaged a little bit to say that there has to be a human reaction gap between the tightening of a wheel nut and the release of that wheel to the system that governs the traffic light, to release the car out of the pits. What they have been doing is going below that 0.2 of a second time. And remember when Bottas made that amazing start and he was governed to be beyond human hand-eye coordination's known speed, and he released the clutch. But he was technically after the lights went out, so there's no argument to be made. But it's that kind of difference that they're talking about in terms of securing the wheel and saying it's okay to go. There was something happening where it was almost assumed to be safe. It was an opt-out system rather than an opt-in system, I think.
Yeah.
So they are going to be introducing that, but it shouldn't actually affect the overall human factor difference in the pit stop. If you can change a tire in 0.7 seconds, the release will be at 0.9 seconds. It doesn't mean you can't train to get to 0.6, 0.5 and shave that off, but there has to be that delay to allow the human being the time to actually clear the wheel to be released. It does seem a little bit like a solution to a problem that didn't exist. I don't know about you.
Yeah, when have we ever heard of safety with pit stops? It's never normally when we see rule changes, it's something that has been going on for a while. The FIA has talked about it. They've said we're working on a rule, and then something comes out, but it just seemed like all of a sudden they were like, we're changing pit stops. They're changed, and everyone was like, okay, but why?
I don't remember ever seeing a pit stop that was too fast and a wheel came off.
Yeah.
Which is the only reason you think that they would produce this rule. By far, the vast majority of cases where there has been a dangerous pit stop, it has ended up slower than a fast pit stop because effectively something's gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
I really don't understand it.
Yeah. If you think about most of the pit stop problems that we've had over the years, I think most of it is just attributed to the driver maybe being a little bit too ambitious, or I don't know exactly how the light above him is controlled. I think that's just, I don't know if there's someone just sitting there hitting a button, or if it's controlled by the wheel guns.
What I believe is there is a button or a release or possibly an opt-in button on each wheel gun, and that there is an override for the guy with the jack at the front. There's an override if there's a car coming down the pits where he can hold the car. It's a dead man button, so he can hold the car until it's safe to release. So there's 5 factors that go into that traffic light firing green or red coming off, or whatever system they use.
Yeah, but like you said, most of the bad pit stops that end in tires falling off or something happening, they tend to be slow pit stops where the wheel gun malfunctions or something along that line. That has nothing to do, in my opinion, with the safety of the pit stop. That's just a mechanical malfunction, which happens all the time in Formula One on the cars. It's just so happens that this mechanical malfunction is happening with the wheel gun. So
no, absolutely. We talked about the new rules as well. They did show the new car for 2022. I don't think it's going to look anything like that. I think that's a nice artist interpretation of what the car might look like. It appeared to not have a working DRS. The 2 rear wing horizontal elements had no mechanical ability to move.
Has there been anything said about if they're keeping DRS?
No, not that I've seen. I haven't seen confirmation either way.
So, it would be interesting to see if they remove DRS, because obviously the whole point, I think, of these new cars was to decrease downforce when following a car. Yeah. And I think the whole reason that DRS was invented was to alleviate the fact that it was difficult to follow cars. So maybe they're saying DRS is gone because we fixed that problem.
It would be it'd be a little premature, and they have been very wedded to DRS, which was a temporary solution that's been around something like 10 years.
Yeah, a very long time.
And it's something I've not felt the sport has actually benefited from at all. Yes, some cars get past other cars that might previously have been stuck behind them, but it's kind of taken away some of the anticipation of a battle that there used to be. But I think I'm all for ground effect aerodynamics rather than surface effect. That seems to be the real shift, and it should give more of an onus on grip rather than aerodynamic performance, which again should in theory help cars run closer to each other. Maybe that would be a blessing and a curse. I don't know.
Yeah. One of the biggest changes I think I noticed on that car was they added winglets above the wheels, which
like mudguards, it looks like, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. They do serve a purpose, which is to decrease the dirty air that is created by tires, because there is a ton of dirty air that's created by tires, which is I'm excited to see if it's able to work. I would love if it's able to work because it would obviously create better racing.
Yeah.
And who doesn't like good racing? I don't know if it's going to change anything about places like Monaco, because I think the cars are a little bit smaller, but they're not smaller to the point where it changes anything about a track like Monaco necessarily.
Right. No, I agree. Maybe they'll go slightly faster through the castle at Baku. Maybe.
Yeah. And these cars are 2 or 3 seconds slower, according to I think James Allison from Mercedes, than the current cars. Who knows? No.
Yeah, apparently it puts them back 6 or 7 years in terms of track record speeds as well. But as has often been stated, aerodynamicists cannot forget what they've learned.
Yeah.
So it was supposed to be a 2 second plus difference this year to last year, and I know a lot of gamers are finding out with F1 2021 that there's a very different feel to the car that's been coded in to recognize that shift of power differentials on the car and how the car feels, but they haven't gone back 2 seconds track for track, so and they will that gap will only close as the aerodynamicists are able to continually develop.
Yeah, these are the best engineers in the world. I don't know if I'm going a little bit too far in saying that, but these are some of the best car people in the world, and there are hundreds of them working for most of the teams on the grid. Some of the small teams don't maybe necessarily have maybe that many people, but still, these guys are incredibly intelligent engineers. They know what they're doing. Like you said, they don't forget the 7 or 8 years of engineering that they have just spent their life on. So they're going to make adjustments. Teams are going to find advantages. Some teams are going to be held back a little bit. It's just the way Formula One works. And, with every regulation change, the idea is to shake up the grid and change the way the cars are racing. I don't mind that they're getting slower, because obviously that means they are safer inherently if they're going slower. And, I know I've seen a lot of people saying that they don't like that the cars are getting slower and that F1 should be pushing towards increasing speeds. But when does it become too dangerous? When cars are catching on fire or drivers are having 51G impacts? No.
I don't think the cars should be cornering any faster with these tires.
Yeah.
With tire manufacturer either. I've got a lot of colleagues in aviation, and I'm always surprised when they're not keen on F1, because I say to them, imagine the Typhoon aircraft and the engineering that went into that, and just flip it on its head. That's an F1 car, effectively. Yeah. It's an upside down military jet, and the way I've heard it explained before in the past is that no business venture or engineering venture is closer to the space race than a Formula One team versus team battle that goes on in the offices in between race, and the reset button is pressed every season or every big change of regulations. It is the space race happening before our eyes for a sporting context, and it's absolutely incredible. I love it. I love the engineering challenge. I love the fact that teams go up and down the grid, and it's a battle. And I'm especially pleased with one of the things that, you know, the American-owned Liberty company have brought in is a better sense of parity financially. That's even better for me, because obviously having a team like Force India battling with the might of the budgets of Ferrari and Mercedes, it was an unequal playing field, and I love the fact that that's come down.
You know, I've talked extensively about this with people that watch F1. I really enjoy that kind of aspect of how it's a very different sport in that, for instance, I'll use baseball because that is probably the only sport that I would say I know more about than F1.
Right.
And in baseball, there is rumors about, like, you know, trades. Obviously, the MLB trade, I don't know if you follow the MLB, the MLB trade deadline is in just about a week's time. It's a big deal for baseball. Sure. But I feel like with F1, there is a lot more transparency between what the teams are thinking versus in an MLB situation with what the front offices are thinking. Sure. I love that parody. I love also what Liberty Media has done to provide insight for the fans, because I think many fans like to know what's going on. One thing that what I would point to is, like, you know, them adding the FIA to team radios mid-race. Right. That's one of my favorite additions to a broadcast for any sport ever, is to hear teams complaining to Michael, you know, like Toto telling Michael Massey, check your email, I sent you an email. That was very funny to listen to, and also just incredibly insightful, because what other sport do you hear that, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I mean, you see utterly futile attempts to persuade, you know, referees in soccer or in the NFL. You know, you see browbeating going on where officials are sort of backing away, and I don't think it ever really has any sort of impact. There is definitely an argument that some of the lobbying is done in a very intelligent way and does have impact in meetings. I do think that for all Michael Massey's strengths and what he has brought to the racing, I do think some of the transparency is perhaps alerting us to a little bit too cozy a relationship between the officials making decisions. Really, he's the race director. He shouldn't really have any comment about officiating a disagreement between drivers or an incident. That's the job of the steward. There really should be much more of a wall between that, and I don't think anyone should be able to contact the stewards at all. I think the stewards should operate with information that they have, which is more than we get on the TV. They should make those decisions in complete isolation from any politicizing on.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to mention before we go is the disparity of penalties given.
Right.
You know, Lewis was given a 10-second penalty for the wreck with Max. And you take a look at that wreck, and then you look at the incident between, like, Perez and Lando in Austria, which was given the same time penalty. And, you know, I
thought that was 5 seconds, that one.
No, that was a 10-second penalty.
Was it?
Or maybe?
Okay.
I
thought that Perez got two lots of 5 seconds.
You are right. Yeah, it was 5 seconds. So I think that's my point.
Maybe, but and there have been arguments. You know, Christian Horner was saying, you know, you need to look at the consequence of the action, and that's.
I don't like that.
The speed of the corner, maybe the speed and the danger level of the corner, but then you're going to get into the most complicated system where, you know, any accident at Cops is worth, say, 15 seconds is your starting point, and if it's at Brooklands, it's a 5 seconds. It's a you'd have to be grading every corner on penalizability of a
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
It will become from a sport that is already suffering from a great deal of complaints about its complexity. You don't need to add things like that into there. It just basically needs to be a group of stewards, including a driver, an ex-driver, have determined that this is the penalty for the crime.
Yeah.
End of story. No appeals. It's akin to the referee's whistle. That's it.
Yeah. I pointed out in our podcast about Austria that in that Perez and Lando incident, had there not been a gravel trap on the other side of that curb, I don't think a penalty is given to Lando because Perez doesn't lose anything from that. He may lose a position or two, but he stays on asphalt, which is obviously much grippier than gravel. Yeah. So he doesn't.
There's also two counter arguments. One is that had that happened at Monaco, Perez is out of the race.
Yeah.
Secondly, had that happened with a wall next to it, neither driver would have pushed as hard as they had.
Yeah.
So if there is a natural track barrier limit to racing where they are faced with danger, one of those guys looking out, or they'll only do it once,
Yeah.
I had to cut you off, sorry.
No, it's fine. I think probably an answer to all of this that we're talking about is just more of a complete understanding between the stewards and the drivers of what is legal, what is not legal, because every single week we see that there are certain turns that have certain rules that are different than other turns on the track. Yeah. That makes no sense to me. I just can't get over that. Why is there, in Bahrain, for instance, where a driver can go completely off the track, meters away from the racing line, and then midway through the weekend they're like, you can't do that, but you still can, but only if there's not a car next to you. There needs to be just more transparency about what is safe, what is not safe, so that drivers aren't making a move thinking that the stewards are going to think one way when they're going to think another way, and the driver just has no way of knowing that.
Absolutely. I mean, the issue with the white line, at Austria, I don't know why they've just moved the white line. It's only a white line, just paint a new white line, right? It's very interesting. I mean, I hate to be political about anything, but it does remind me of our UK government messaging around the pandemic, which was wear a mask unless you can't, and go to work unless you don't want to. It's rules like that which just mean nothing in the end.
Yeah. So I think that's all we have for this. We got a lot out of this weekend, as we said.
We went over time, didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah, we did. So that is us from the Left Foot Braking Podcast. We should be back within a week or so with the Hungarian Grand Prix, and then there's a season break after that. We should be able to scrounge up some non-race weekend podcasts. There will be in a little bit different format than this, hopefully with some friends. We'll see. But
let's see what we can do. Yeah.
Thank you for watching, and goodbye.